For thousands of years, the lands of what is now northern and central California were not an empty wilderness, but a carefully tended home. From the fog-shrouded cliffs of the Pacific coast to the golden oak-dotted foothills of the Sierra Nevada, and across the vast inland sea of the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta, this diverse landscape was the domain of a people who called themselves simply Miwok, the people. Their name is a profound statement of identity, a declaration that this specific place was their world and they were its people. The Miwok were not a single, monolithic tribe, but a collection of distinct, linguistically related groups, each with a deep and intimate connection to their own territory. An animated map of their ancestral homelands would reveal a complex mosaic of cultures and languages stretching across a vast portion of the state. The Coast Miwok inhabited the temperate lands of present-day Marin in southern Sonoma counties, from the Golden Gate to Bodega Bay. To the north and east, the Lake Miwok lived in the basin of Clear Lake. The Bay Miwok, also known as the Saclan, occupied the hills and valleys east of the San Francisco Bay in what is now Contra Costa County. Further inland, the Plains Miwok thrived in the rich wetlands of the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta and the lower river valleys. Finally, ascending into the mountains, the Sierra Miwok, themselves divided into northern, central, and southern groups, made their homes on the western slopes and foothills of the Sierra Nevada, a territory that includes the sacred granite valley of Yosemite. To understand the Miwok is to first understand this diversity. Their world was composed of over 100 distinct villages, organized into smaller, independent political units. This structure fostered a deep, localized knowledge of the land, creating a rich tapestry of related but unique communities. Their story is not one of a single kingdom, but of a multitude of peoples who shared a common cultural heritage and a profound spiritual connection to the landscapes that sustained them. The Miwok way of life was predicated on a sophisticated understanding of the natural world, a relationship that went far beyond simple hunting and gathering. They were active environmental managers who cultivated their world through careful stewardship, a practice now recognized as traditional ecological knowledge. Rather than dominating the landscape, they enhanced its productivity for all living things. The Miwok domesticated dogs and cultivated tobacco, but their most significant agricultural practice was the management of the entire ecosystem. A cornerstone of this stewardship was the use of controlled burns. By intentionally setting low-intensity fires, they cleared underbrush to reduce the risk of catastrophic wildfires, recycled nutrients back into the soil, and encouraged the growth of specific plants and fungi valuable for food and basketry. This practice was so effective that the modern extent of California black oak forests in parts of Yosemite National Park is a direct legacy of Miwok cultivation. This was not the work of a nomadic people, a label Miwok descendants firmly reject. It was the work of a people who were deeply territorial, who tended their lands for millennia, and who even planted specific varieties of oak trees to cultivate acorns with preferred flavors. The acorn was the absolute staple of their diet, a superfood rich in protein, carbohydrates, and minerals. The process of transforming this bitter nut into a nourishing meal was a testament to their ingenuity. In the autumn, acorns were harvested and stored in massive, basket-like granaries called chaka. These structures, which could stand over 8 feet tall, were woven from poles and brush, lined with wormwood to repel pests, and thatched to shed rain and snow. To make the acorns edible, the toxic tannins had to be removed. Women would first shell the nuts, then pound the meat into a fine meal in mortar cups, or chaws, ground into solid rock outcroppings. This flour was then placed in a sandy basin where hot and cold water was repeatedly poured over it, leaching away the bitterness. The final meal was mixed with water in a watertight basket and cooked by dropping red-hot stones into the mixture, creating a thick mush or soup. While acorns were central, the Miwok diet was incredibly diverse, reflecting the richness of their varied environments. The Coast Miwok harvested a bounty of seafood, including crab, clams, abalone, salmon, and rockfish. Interior groups relied more on hunting deer and elk, and gathering a wide array of seeds, bulbs, fungi, and even highly prized grasshoppers. A core value underlying their entire subsistence strategy was that little or nothing was wasted. Every part of a deer was utilized: the meat for food, the hide for clothing and shelter, the antlers and bones for tools, and even the brain for tanning the hide. A single plant, the soap root, could be mashed to use as soap, crushed to stupefy and catch fish, and its dried fibers bundled to make brushes. This philosophy demonstrates a relationship with the environment built on reciprocity and profound respect, a sustainable model of living that endured for thousands of years. The center of the Miwok world was the village. Before European contact, Miwok society was highly decentralized, organized into what anthropologists call tribales, independent and sovereign communities of 75 to several hundred people, often living in one or more permanent villages within a defined territory. This political structure, which lacked a single centralized authority, fostered local autonomy and a deep sense of place. Leadership within these communities was notably balanced and meritocratic. While a male headman, or hoipu, was responsible for advising the community and organizing tasks, a powerful female leader, the Mayan, presided over the women's ceremonial house and held considerable authority. Furthermore, leadership positions were open to both men and women and were often chosen based on personal characteristics like wisdom and integrity, rather than strictly through heredity. This egalitarian approach to governance was further structured by a moiety system in which the entire society was divided into two halves. These moieties regulated kinship, marriage, and political relationships, creating a complex social web that maintained harmony within and between communities. This decentralized, merit-based, and gender-balanced model of leadership stood in stark contrast to the hierarchical and patriarchal systems of the European colonizers who would later arrive, creating a fundamental clash of worldviews. Miwok architecture was ingeniously adapted to the local environment. Along the coast, people constructed cone-shaped homes from tool reeds, grass, or bark laid over a flexible pole frame, ideal for the mild, damp climate. In the interior, the Plains and Sierra Miwok built more substantial, semi-subterranean lodges covered with earth, which provided excellent insulation against the summer heat and winter cold. For seasonal hunting trips into the High Sierra, they built temporary lean-tos of cedar bark called umacha. Larger villages were distinguished by two important communal structures: the large semi-subterranean ceremonial roundhouse, or hunyi, which served as the heart of the community for dances and spiritual gatherings, and smaller sweat houses, which were important centers for male social and ceremonial life. These villages, some of which were inhabited for hundreds of years, were not just collections of buildings, but living communities that embodied the Miwok social and spiritual order. The cultural fabric of Miwok life was rich and vibrant, woven together through art, spirituality, and communal activities. Among their most celebrated artistic achievements was their elaborate basketry. Far more than simple containers, Miwok baskets were a high art form, essential to nearly every aspect of daily and ceremonial life. Using materials gathered from their environment, willow for the frame, sedge root and redbud for the weaving, and bracken fern root for black patterns, women employed both coiling and twining techniques to create an astonishing variety of forms. There were large conical burden baskets for carrying goods, flat trays for winnowing seeds, and intricately woven cooking baskets so watertight that they could be used to boil acorn mush with hot stones. The Miwok worldview was animistic. They saw the spirits of animals as their ancestors and believed the world was alive with spiritual power. This spiritual life found its most powerful expression in the Kuksu religion, a complex system of secret ceremonies practiced by many Miwok groups and their neighbors. Performed in the roundhouse, these ceremonies featured elaborately costumed dancers impersonating spirits. The dances were meant to ensure the renewal of the world, prevent natural disasters, and maintain harmony between the human and spiritual realms. A unique and lasting testament to this spiritual life is etched in stone. At what is now Indian Grinding Rock State Historic Park, a massive limestone outcropping served as a communal kitchen for centuries, its surface covered with over 1,000 chaws, or mortar holes. What makes this site, known as chaws, unique in California is the presence of numerous petroglyphs carved directly into the rock among the mortar holes. These carvings of circles, spoked wheels, and animal tracks, some believed to be 2,000 to 3,000 years old, represent a rare fusion of the sacred and the mundane, a permanent reminder of the spiritual significance infused into daily life. Community life was also strengthened through play. The Miwok enjoyed a unique mixed-gender ballgame called Paskoi Ewie, played on a field roughly 110 yards long. The rules cleverly balanced the roles of men and women. Men were only allowed to kick the deerskin ball toward the opposing team's goal. Women, however, could handle the ball in any way they chose, kicking it, picking it up, and running with it. In a remarkable twist, a male player was allowed to pick up a female teammate who was holding the ball and run with her toward the goal, a rule that speaks to a spirit of playful cooperation between the sexes. The arrival of Spanish explorers and missionaries in the 18th century marked the beginning of a multi-stage apocalypse for the Miwok. While the first contact with the coast Miwok occurred as early as 1595, the systematic colonization began with the founding of the California mission system in 1769. This system was not a benign enterprise of spiritual conversion. It was a machine of cultural destruction, described by historians as a network of coercive religious labor camps designed to benefit the Spanish crown. Beginning in the late 1700s, Miwok people from the coast and bay regions were forcibly removed from their ancestral lands and taken to Mission San Francisco de Asís, Mission San Jose, and later Mission San Rafael. Once there, they were stripped of their culture, language, and freedom. Their traditional way of life was systematically dismantled. They were used as forced labor to construct the missions and work the agricultural fields. The introduction of Spanish livestock destroyed the native plants that were the foundation of their diet. Confined in crowded, unsanitary conditions, the Miwok were defenseless against European diseases like measles and smallpox, which swept through the missions and caused catastrophic loss of life. Malnutrition, abuse, and despair were rampant. The statistics are staggering. Between 1769 and the 1830s, approximately 2,800 coast Miwok were baptized into the mission system. Of those, an estimated 3/4 died. The pre-contact Miwok population, once estimated to be at least 25,000, began a precipitous decline from which it would never fully recover. The Miwok, however, did not submit passively. Resistance was constant, taking many forms. Many individuals and groups frequently fled the missions, attempting to return to their homes. The Bay Miwok, particularly the Saklan Tribalete, mounted a fierce and sustained armed resistance. After a mass exodus from Mission San Francisco in 1795, they fought a decade-long guerrilla war against Spanish troops sent to recapture them, a testament to their refusal to be subjugated. Yet this resistance could not stop the tide. The mission period inflicted a devastating blow, a slow-burning catastrophe that shattered families, destroyed traditions, and decimated the population. It was the first wave of a long disaster, critically weakening Miwok society and leaving it vulnerable to the even greater horrors that were to come. If the mission period was a slow-burning fire, the California gold rush was a violent explosion. The discovery of gold at Sutter's Mill in 1848 occurred directly in the heart of Miwok and Nisenan territory, unleashing an unprecedented flood of humanity into the Sierra foothills. Hundreds of thousands of miners and settlers poured into California, driven by a rapacious hunger for wealth that had no regard for the land or its original inhabitants. This invasion brought immediate and catastrophic environmental destruction. Hydraulic mining operations blasted away entire hillsides, choking rivers with sediment and destroying the fish populations that had sustained the Miwok for millennia. Forests were clear-cut for timber, and the settlers' livestock grazed voraciously, destroying native grasses and consuming the acorns that were the Miwok's staff of life. The environmental toll was matched by a wave of human violence that is now widely recognized as a state-sanctioned genocide. Miners, settlers, and newly formed militias committed widespread atrocities against native people with impunity. Entire villages were massacred, and individuals were hunted down and killed. This violence was not random. It was a systematic campaign to eliminate the native population and seize control of the land. The government of the newly formed state of California actively supported this extermination. The 1850 Act for the Government and Protection of Indians, despite its name, was a piece of legislation that effectively legalized the enslavement of Native people. It allowed for any Native person to be indentured for the slightest infraction and enabled the kidnapping of Native children to be used as forced apprentices. The demographic collapse was staggering. The Native population of California, which had already been severely reduced during the Mission era, plummeted from an estimated 150,000 in 1848 to a mere 30,000 by 1870. For the Sierra Miwok, who were at the epicenter of the gold rush, the population fell from an estimated 10,000 before contact to just 679 by the 1910 census. This was the second, more intense and more explicitly genocidal wave of the catastrophe that began under the Spanish, a brutal period that nearly erased the Miwok people from their ancestral lands. In the midst of the chaos and violence of the gold rush, the United States government extended what appeared to be an offer of peace and protection. Between 1851 and 1852, federal commissioners traveled throughout California, compelling tribal leaders, including those from Miwok communities, to sign a series of 18 treaties. In these agreements, the tribes were forced to relinquish their rights to their vast ancestral territories. In exchange, the government promised to set aside 18 reservations, totaling approximately 7.5 million acres of land, for their exclusive use and protection. It was a promise the United States never intended to keep. The California state legislature, along with the state's U.S. senators, lobbied furiously against the treaties. They viewed the reserved lands as an obstacle to settlement and mining and demanded that the land be opened to white citizens. Bowing to this intense political pressure, the U.S. Senate met in a secret executive session on July 8, 1852, and refused to ratify any of the 18 treaties. To conceal this act of bad faith, the Senate then ordered the treaties to be sealed and kept hidden from the public. For more than 50 years, their very existence was a government secret, finally revealed only in 1905. This secretive rejection had devastating and permanent consequences. It left the Miwok and all other California Indians in a state of legal and existential limbo. Having ceded their lands under duress in treaties that were now void, they were rendered landless. With no legal title to the reservations they had been promised, and no recognition of their rights to their ancestral homes, they were legally considered trespassers on their own land, vulnerable to expulsion, violence, and starvation, with no protection from the federal government that had betrayed them. This act of political duplicity was the final step in the dispossession of the Miwok people, cementing the loss of their world. Stripped of their lands, their population decimated, and their legal rights denied, the surviving Miwok people were scattered. Many were forced to live on the fringes of the new American society, working as seasonal laborers on the very ranches that now occupied their ancestral territories. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the federal government began to address the problem of landless Indians by purchasing small, often undesirable parcels of land to serve as home sites. These small allotments, known as rancherias, became the last refuge for many Miwok families. Places like the Shingle Springs Rancheria, Tuolumne Rancheria, and Grayton Rancheria were established during this period. Life on the rancherias was characterized by extreme poverty and a continued struggle for cultural survival. Confined to these small parcels, the Miwok were cut off from the vast territories that had defined their economy, spirituality, and identity. During this period, they endured the indignity of being referred to by the derogatory slur, Digger Indians, a term that dismissed their complex culture. In a powerful act of self-determination, the name Miwok was officially reclaimed in a 1924 ceremony, a symbolic burning of the old slur and a reaffirmation of their true identity. This era was a long silence in the historical record, a time of immense hardship and quiet perseverance as the Miwok fought to hold on to the fragments of their world in the shadows of the society that had tried to destroy them. Just as Miwok communities began to stabilize and reorganize on the rancherias, the U.S. government launched a new assault, this time a legislative one. In the 1950s, Congress enacted a policy known as Termination, a disastrous experiment in federal Indian policy aimed at forcibly assimilating Native Americans by ending the special trust relationship between tribes and the U.S. government. The policy sought to dissolve tribal governments, sell off tribal lands, and make Native Americans subject to state laws. In 1958, the federal recognition of numerous California tribes, including the Federated Coast Miwok, was terminated by an act of Congress. This action stripped them of their sovereignty, their land base, and their eligibility for federal services, effectively erasing them as political entities in the eyes of the U.S. government. The Wilton Rancheria was also terminated during this period. This set off a new, decades-long struggle, a legal and political battle to reverse the termination and restore their status as sovereign nations. For over 40 years, leaders of the terminated tribes fought tirelessly, navigating a complex bureaucracy and raising funds to take their fight to Washington, D.C. This long, arduous campaign finally bore fruit in December 2000, when the U.S. government signed the Greaton Rancheria Restoration Act, officially restoring federal recognition to the tribe, now known as the Federated Indians of Greaton Rancheria. Wilton Rancheria would have to wait until 2009 for its restoration. This fight for recognition was more than a legal battle. It was a fight for their very existence as a people.